The star of our show today about ecological invaders with Mackenzie Wylie Arbic of the River Institute. Mackenzie holds a Bachelor of Science from Queen's University in Environmental Biology. She has worked at the River Institute since 2021 on the Great River Rapport Ecosystem Health Report. Her research has mostly focused on invasive species in the St. Lawrence River, and on her own time, she enjoys hiking, spending time along the river, and playing guitar and watching documentaries. It is my great pleasure today to introduce my friend and colleague, Mackenzie.
Thank you, Emily. I'm just going to take one moment to get my slides up. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming, and thank you for tuning in online. Today, I'm going to be presenting to you on the invasive species in the St. Lawrence River. So like Emily said, she gave a really good background about me. I've been at the River Institute for 4 years now, working with the River Rapport and the FINS project. I was able to get onboarded as a volunteer in 2021, right after my Bachelor of Environmental Biology at Queen's, which was very, very amazing. Honestly, I was so happy to get onboarded. I was also born and raised in Cornwall and have spent so much time on the river, so the research that I do is very, very close to my heart. And I want to get into a bit about what the Great River Rapport is, give some introductions, and then we'll get into my research. So the Great River Rapport is led by Lee McGahey. She's at the top left there. She's an amazing human being, and the rest of these people, beautiful people here, are all involved in the Great River Rapport, whether it's through collaborations, through the research, or community engagement. Of course, we have other partners and collaborators that make every day possible with the Great River Rapport, and our funders who are able to make our work continue to go on every year. Now, the basis of the Great River Rapport kind of started from this question that our executive director, Jeff Rydell, continued to get over and over again, and that is, what is the health of the river? Now, of course, it's a complicated question to answer, so that's why the Great River Rapport was started. Now, in 2018, when it was initiated, we were working with Henry Lickers, who wanted us to frame the work in the Ahande Galadakwa. This is the Thanksgiving address, and it's a Haudenosaunee teaching that acknowledges all of creation for fulfilling their roles and responsibilities to each other. And this is one of the fundamental aspects of the Great River Rapport. And of course, over time, we've continued to work with our partners at Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, specifically the leaders of the Environment Program, starting with Peggy Pike Thompson, Abraham Francis, Kayla Sunday, and now Claire McFall. One special thing about the Great River Rapport is that we want to communicate the state of the river through different perspectives. Like I mentioned, the Indigenous perspective through the Ahande Galadakwa. We also have the scientific component, which is where our research comes in. We find all the relevant data and bring it together on each of the indicators, which I'll explain what those are in a moment. And finally, we have our community perspectives, which is also kind of where the questions came from in the beginning, coming back to that question of what is the health of the St. Lawrence River. Now, these 10 points are how we work. So at first, we define the boundary of the Great River Rapport, which is the upper St. Lawrence River. Then we ask the community, what are your concerns? And we're able to bring those concerns with scientists and work together to select indicators of ecosystem health. Now, we were able to very slowly pin down 35 indicators of health. However, there's so many more that could also be incorporated. And for each of these 35 indicators, we then identify and gather relevant data, conduct a scientific investigation, collaborate, then we translate the science and spread the knowledge to the public, and then we continue to engage in ongoing conversations and, of course, take action wherever we can. Now here we kind of have the categories of the 35 indicators. We have contaminants, population diversity, land use, water, and invasive species. And I'm going to be talking to you today about the invasive species indicators. So coming back to our region of concern, it is the St. Lawrence River. And it's a beautiful and diverse ecosystem that touches binational waters between the US and Canada. It also connects the Atlantic Ocean and the Great Lakes, so it's very, very important. It's also home to 45 million people, and fun fact, it drains more than 20% of Earth's fresh water. Now, as much as it's home to a lot of humans, it's also home to many, many diverse species, biodiversity of insects, turtles, frogs, plants, fish. It connects ecosystem for migratory species like the American eel, another one of our ecological indicators. and it provides food, water, and beauty to us and also to these animals. It's also a very important transportation route, which is one thing that I'm going to be covering a little bit about throughout this presentation. Now here's just a visual depiction of the kinds of changes that have occurred over time as there's been more people and more developments happening along the river. Changes to the ecosystem as we've had an increased need for goods. And one of the main things is shipping. Now, in 1959, the St. Lawrence Seaway was completed. I'm sure a lot of you know about the Seaway, but if not, I'm going to explain it a little bit. So this is a route along the river coming from the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes that allows for transportation of goods. And of course, this is amazing for development. However, it does come with different costs, ecologically, that is. Now, continuing with changes over time, as human activities have increased, there have been accidental and deliberate changes. And one of these things has been the introduction of non-native species, which is one of the main topics for today. Now, what do I mean by a non-native species? These are organisms that evolved somewhere else and were transported in some way from different locations, either through some sort of mechanism of transportation, like shipping, for instance, and it all comes down to our human action. And one thing I'd really like to highlight is, like any other organism, whether they're native or non-native, they're just trying to survive. They're doing what they can with the resources they have. And they didn't really ask to be here. We kind of just brought them here. So there is, of course, still a concern because they do create changes in the environment. And the river is highly susceptible because of the transportation route with the seaway. And alike to other environmental changes, there are unknowns, which is why we have to keep track of what's going on. And there are many non-natives, and a few of them can actually become successful and then become invasive in the long term. Now here I want to demonstrate a little visual difference between an invaded ecosystem and kind of more of a natural biodiverse ecosystem. On the left here we have a wetland that looks like it's been taken over by one species, and this is Phragmites australis, also known as the common reed. This species specifically is able to create monocultures, which is just plant after plant after plant of the same species, and they actually take over and take away resources from other plant species, and then it impacts other fish species or insect species that need those plant species. So this is an issue when it comes to invasive species. And then on the right here, this is just an example also of wetland. And if you can tell, you can't really pinpoint just one specific plant, and this is good because we want that biodiversity. We want to see a lot of different organisms in one environment. And most likely there's a lot more fish on the right side in the waters there. Now you might be wondering, when do the non-native species become invasive? Because that doesn't always happen. These species, the few that do, they are able to thrive in the new environments, outcompete local species, and this is most likely because they're able to eat anything that's kind of around them, use these resources, and they don't really have their natural predators to prey on them. So there's nothing keeping their numbers intact or keeping their numbers under control. And they're also potentially able to adapt to familiar conditions. So maybe the place that they originated from is actually very similar to the river, for instance. So they're kind of just plopped into a similar environment and able to do their thing. Now, we have these two that I'm going to be covering today. These are two of the 35 indicators of health, of environmental health. And we look to these to kind of tell us trends about our relationship with the ecosystem. And we're going to try to make conclusions that'll help identify what changes that we can do to help keep the river healthy and beautiful. Now I'm going to dive into a bit of the results from my research on non-native species. Now we have some graphs. So this graph here is showing the total number of non-native species cumulatively over time from 1821 to 2024. Now by cumulatively, I just mean every year you're just adding the species from the previous year. So earlier on in the, between like 1820 and the 1900s, you see more of a flat line. So there's not necessarily not as many introductions, but there's not as many detections of species. So it's either there's not as much monitoring or there's just not as many species being introduced at this time. And then if we're looking past, let's say 1960s, we're seeing a lot more of these data points bunched together, which means that there's more species being detected. One hypothesis for this increase in detections could be because of the amount of boats coming in through the seaway and introducing new species. But of course, it could also have to do with more monitoring. There's more people on the river, there's more people around to be like, hey, what is that thing in the water? So yeah, we're seeing a bit of an increase over time. And of course, we would hope that the little plateau that's happening at the end there will continue into the future as management strategies become more efficient and we're able to identify what we can do to stop new introductions. Next, we have the vectors of introduction. So we've already talked a bit about the shipping industry. So in the purple section of this pie chart here, we have the different vectors of introduction from shipping. So we have ballast water, fouling, and solid ballast. And I'm going to describe those in just a moment. On the left side, we have the largest chunk. These are all release vectors, sorry. And these are all things that we're kind of doing in our everyday lives, like a little bit more controlled, that we could have more control over to minimize these kinds of introductions. So I'm going to go through a few examples for these different vectors, starting with this commercial shipping. So we have the zebra mussels, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about these little guys. They were plopped here through shipping ballast water. Now, what is ballast water exactly? It's the water that's taken up into a ship to increase its stability for its voyage. So zebra mussels were kind of sucked in at its port of departure, brought along through the Atlantic Ocean, and then at the port of arrival were then kind of released. And thankfully for them, I guess, they liked the environment and they're able to thrive and establish very quickly. And since they've had significant impacts on the food web and water clarity because they're just able to filter feed and take in kind of all the nutrients from the water and other things. And I'm actually going to describe a bit more later. Next, we have cultivation release, which is whenever, it's only pertaining to plant species actually, whenever species are introduced for, like, let's say ponds or aquariums, for their kind of visual allure, their exoticness. And unfortunately, at times, they can be improperly disposed of. And this is what happened with this water soldier example. And this species specifically, kind of like the Phragmites example from before, can form dense mats or monocultures, and then this then decreases native plant diversity and then has negative effects down the line. And this specific species isn't widespread at the moment, but it is at high risk of spreading elsewhere, which is why we have to kind of keep an eye out for these guys. Next, we have accidental release. This example is of the tench, which is a fish species. They reproduce quickly and can survive in low oxygen. And they were actually released from an illegal fish farm, which of course is something that could have been avoided. And they have since spread throughout the system, and we're not really sure. We're keeping an eye out for population sizes. It's the type of thing that we're just going to have to continue monitoring into the future. Next, we have another potential familiar fish species to some people, the common carp. So this is an example of deliberate release. This fish species was intentionally released to support commercial fishing. So again, something that could have been avoided, but it was done kind of with good intent of being able to go out and catch some carp. And unfortunately, it's resulted in negative impacts on native fish species. Now, the next little section, we have a breakdown of what kinds of species are on the list that we've put together throughout the research of the 131 species. 50.4% of them, a very large chunk, are plant species. And then we have our runners-up fish species at 14.5% and benthic invertebrates at 13%. And then we also have a list of algal species and zooplankton. And you might be wondering why. Why are there so many plant species? There's a few reasons that could potentially contribute to these amounts of plant species. One could be that they're transported very easily. So fragments of plants can actually reproduce on their own, and they can get attached to like boat motors or unknowingly on our boots. So these are the kinds of things that, again, could be avoided, but it just takes diligence and attention to detail. They also grow very rapidly. They're able to create those big monocultures, like I mentioned in the last couple examples. So this also helps with detection rates. So as much as there are maybe a lot more plant introductions happening, they're also a lot easier to detect because they're just kind of rooted in the ground there. You don't have to go out and catch them. So that could be a few reasons as to why they take up such a big proportion of the list. Next, we have fish species. And like I said, with the common carp, they can be released through stocking. So there have been actually a good chunk of the fish species deliberately released. And they can often be generalist species, so they might be able to establish a little faster because they're able to take advantage of the resources that are in the system. And they can also be quite competitive. And finally, we have the invertebrates. These are small, ubiquitous organisms. They're able to actually often stay in a resting stage. So unknowingly, things in like mud, kind of like on our boots, or in solid ballast, which instead of water, soil or mud is used as the ballast to stabilize ships. They could also be resting in there, and then when brought to a new environment, kind of like wake up and are able to do their thing and potentially establish. And yeah, they're often transported easily, although usually accidentally. Now we have the region of origin for the species list. Again, we have a really big chunk in the green, and this is showing the Eurasian supercontinent. Now, what do I mean by Eurasia? It's the biggest landmass on Earth, and the species that are native to this area are actually those that are both found native in Europe and Asia. So they're not just in Asia, and they're not just in Europe, they're in both, and it's usually within kind of that intersecting land of that invisible boundary between the two continents. And why might they be coming from this area? Of course, it's a big landmass, but it could also be because of the amount of goods coming from this region being transported from Eurasia to North America. The ones that do stick and become invasive, it might be because there's similar environments, which I'm going to get into a little bit later. So they have a little bit of an easier time to establish and thrive in the new environment. Now, some key takeaways about this section. So some non-natives can become very successful, but of course there's a whole chunk of them that don't, but we still have to make sure we're paying attention to all new introductions, as we never really know when they're going to establish and when they're going to create these negative impacts. They do often use the resources in their environment to their benefit, and some of these species, for example, are the round goby, zebra and quagga mussels, Eurasian milfoil, Phragmites, like I said earlier. But today we're going to do a little case study specifically on the fish species, the round goby. So now we're going to move into this. So the round goby, who are they? It's a small benthic fish species. They are actually native to Eurasia in the Ponto-Caspian region, which you can see in the bottom right corner. We have the Black Sea and Caspian Seas. It's important to keep in mind that many species that are considered invasive in their own native environment or in their non-native environments are important in their native range. So for the round goby, they have been fished commercially, and they're actually enjoyed as a salty snack with beer in their native range. So even though they might be, making an impact here, we have to remind ourselves they didn't ask to be here, and they're actually doing a great job out where they evolved. So just wanted to point that out. Finally, as you can see with this beautiful little infograph, they were transported on a ship, and it was actually in ballast water again this time. And this occurred, or at least we first detected the goby in the St. Lawrence River in 1997. And at that time, guess who was here? The zebra mussels. And coincidentally, zebra mussels are the native prey for round gobies. So when they were plopped here, they were like, oh my gosh, I get to eat mussels still. That's awesome. So it was kind of just a crazy turn of events for the gobies, and they're able to establish and become quite numerous. And as you can see from the map here, they're all over, and they're now very common, and they're probably not going away. And here we just have a little bit of data to show you on the population trends. This is from Thousand Islands National Park. Over time, we do see that the round gobies found per site during these nearshore monitoring project, it has gone up between 2005 up until 2020, and most likely has continued. And we do see some dips there, but overall, they are continuing to increase over time. Now I want to get into some of the impacts. So gobies eat native species, which then leads to changes in the food web. I just want to highlight this beautiful infographic done by Stephanie Hildebrand. So right here we have the thicker arrow, and this is actually the original kind of native food web that existed in the St. Lawrence River. So we have our algae, aquatic invertebrates, fish, and water birds. And then came invasive mussels and then the round goby. With them kind of entering the system, we then have these new relationships and interactions happening, which have different impacts on different levels of this food web. So round gobies eat aquatic invertebrates, and because there's so many of these guys, they're actually affecting the biodiversity and the abundance of native snails, for instance. So not necessarily good for the snails. We do also have another example of just how generalist the gobies can be. They kind of eat what they can find, and one of the things they find are smallmouth bass eggs. Now, from this example here, we can see before and after. There is a detail that's very important though with this. So whenever angling's occurring during spawning or during nesting season, it's distracting the bass from their nests, so they aren't protecting their nests, and gobies are able to get in here. So one thing that's super awesome, because we've kind of learned from this example, is angling times or specific times of year have been prohibited from angling, so that this example or this scenario doesn't happen as much and things don't get worse for the smallmouth bass moving forward. So that's something kind of awesome. They're able to coexist as long as we're not coming in during that nesting season with angling activities. We also have another example that's not necessarily bad. So cormorants, these water birds that I'm sure some of you have seen on the river, they kind of look like black ducks. They eat lots of gobies. Now, before the gobies came in, right before they came in, there was a really high proportion of cormorants eating yellow perch, for instance. But when the round gobies started to come in and their population increased, the cormorants realized that this was another prey species they could start eating, and they did just that. And the pressure on the yellow perch decreased while the proportion of diet increased on the round goby. So that's something really cool. Next, we have an example of another kind of change to the food web, the natural food web. So we have new pathways that are allowing for contaminants to enter the system. So we have contaminants in the river, and then we had invasive mussels come in. Now, I kind of mentioned earlier, mussels, the way they feed, they take in water, and they kind of just take in everything that's in the water, including these contaminants. And then gobies come in, and they feed on these mussels. And they feed on a lot of mussels so that their contaminant content is actually more than the mussels, because they're eating a lot of them. And then we have our predatory fish that also realize, oh, goby is something I can eat as well. And they start eating gobies, and they take up even more contaminants. And this is what we call bioaccumulation. Now, this impacts both predatory fish and, of course, those who might be eating these predatory fish. So this is something that is negative and something that we should be concerned of. But, of course, it's good that we know and understand that it's happening right now. Next, for the kinds of habitats that we might find round gobies in, one of the places that are a little less likely would be wetlands, and they seem to become a refuge for native species. Now, if you're not entirely sure what a wetland is, they are usually nearshore areas that are waterlogged, that have waterlogged soil. They have emergent plants that are rooted in the water but are then coming out of the water. So you'll see things like cattails and lilies and, lily pads. And you'll see frogs and turtles and a bunch of diversity. So kind of thankfully, gobies don't like wetlands as much because they're not good habitat for their eggs. So they often avoid them, which means that wetlands could be a refuge for native species and is just another really big reason why we should be conserving wetlands and trying to restore wetlands, because they have so many key species in there, and they're potentially able to be refuges from other invasives. So it's just so important. Wetlands are amazing. Finally, or one of the last slides here, we have some takeaways about the round goby. So like I said, they're probably not going anywhere. There's really, really so many of them. This is one example of just how successful gobies one species can be, and just how much of a difference one species can make, which is why we have to be diligent about keeping track of the kinds of routes that new species can take to come into the system. And it's a really good example of how resources can be used to the benefit of one species. Now, moving forward, with all this information in mind, we kind of want to learn from the data and not continue to make the same mistakes that we may have made in the past. So we want to work and learn together, embrace all forms of knowledge, whether they be Indigenous, from anglers, from the community, from children. And we want to continue to understand our connection and responsibility to nature, because we are, at the end of the day, part of nature, and we rely so much on the resources, fresh air, water, food, of course, from the land. And we want to be able to stay informed. So talks like these are so important. I'm so happy to see a nice turnout tonight and online. And of course, we want to continue to protect important habitats for native species, like wetlands, for instance, and also for us and the future, because we rely so much on clean water and good food. And yeah, we just want to be able to move forward in a positive direction based on these ecological indicators. And now I will open the floor to anyone that has any questions. I also would love to hear any stories from you guys. If you have any stories about changes over time that you've seen on the river. For myself, I know living on the river, I've seen gobies everywhere and not as many native species, unfortunately. So yeah, I'll open it up to anyone if anyone has anything.
When you talk about the gobies being something that we're accepting into our ecosystem, what is the future for, let's say, native species? Like what kind of action is being taking place to protect their populations?
So at this point, like I kind of mentioned, they're cohabitating in different ways. So we do have, some negative impacts, but we also have things like predatory species coming in and now using that as a prey species. When it comes to if any kind of mechanisms of like management on gobies specifically, in general, yeah, basically, with the Great River Report, we are looking at all kinds of native species population. So as we finish those reports, we're going to be able to see if those populations have changed alongside the round goby. So we'll be able to kind of make better, have better understanding of what we can do moving forward. But at this moment, we don't really have the answer of whether, there's been big dips in like fish populations, for instance, because of the round goby. So stay tuned for, those answers.
To see, like, the effects, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so lots of work in progress with the Great River Report, honestly. Yeah, thank you for your question.
I've been living in Cornwall all my life, pretty much, except for university time. Mm-hmm. 60 years ago, we had a cottage on Lake St. Francis near Schlottenberg Park, and we used to go fishing there. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering, there's two questions. One is, when we go through, we call, say, weeds, a bed of weeds, mm-hmm. with the motor, we'd clear the motor, we'd back up and clear the motor. Would that have caused more weeds to come up, or that? Because we've noticed, even the time I was there for about 20 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, it went from usual, we knew where the bed of weeds were, right. And all of a sudden there were more of them, right. When I left. Yeah. And it seemed to be crazy. We didn't know, mm-hmm. where to go with the boat.
Okay, that's a really good question. Something that I don't have the answer for at the moment, because I hadn't really thought about that, but it's something that I would love to look into now. I'm going to make a note of it, and I would love to get back to you. If you wanted, the emails are on the screen here. Mine's at the top. Yeah, that's a really good question, because I did mention with the plant species, like fragments could then reproduce on their own. So yeah, I'd be intrigued to see if that's something that could happen via boat motor cutting. Yeah, really good question.
And the other thing is also, 60 years ago, mm-hmm. we used to fish, and we were allowed, like, I would catch like 200 perch in one day, and we'd clean them, and that was fine. Mm-hmm. But now the last time I went fishing was like 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. So, and the limit was 50, I think, in a basket. Right. Mm-hmm. So I know, because the perch amount were decreasing, mm-hmm. but is there something that we could fish the gobies now? Is mm-hmm. that a nettable fish? compared to the others.
It is. It's a tasty, salty snack in Ukraine.
According to Asia, right?
I actually was having this conversation with my mentor Marianne today because I wanted to remember that point of like they were a snack, right? And she's like, yeah, like it's kind of a delicacy there. So it is something that could be fished for sure. They're much smaller, but there's definitely like ways that we can learn to catch them because they are more near shore. So it's something that maybe someone could start a business, Goby Shack or something. I think it's
Good idea.
I think it's a good point. Thank you so much.
All right, and we have a few online questions as well. So Denis Allaire is asking, what happens to the salt water the ships take into the ballast? Does it affect the river because of the salinity content when the ballast water is released?
Okay, I love that he asked this question because I forgot to mention something earlier. So the salt or the liquid ballast that's taken up, the issue with that is only when it's fresh water being taken up. So it's not always salt water. So when the freshwater gets taken up, it's then brought to a new freshwater environment, and that's when that issue becomes a thing because they're able to survive in the freshwater that's kind of encased in the ship. But one thing that happened in 2006 and 2008 for Canada and US respectively, there was actually regulations put in place to regulate the ballast water. So it became mandatory for ships, international ships, to flush out the fresh water with ocean water in the Atlantic. So that way the species from these freshwater environments wouldn't actually be able to live because they can't live in salt water. I guess when they do then bring the salt water to the river, it wouldn't really make much of a difference because it's a very small amount of water, but that's actually a good point because if there's a lot of ships doing it at one port, for instance, potentially in that specific kind of surface area of water, again, that's something maybe I could look into because I never really thought about it. So thank you so much, Denis. Appreciate that.
And maybe we can get volunteers out testing conductivity at
There we
these
go.
places.
Yes.
Just a fun little...
Great point, Emily.
Okay, so we have another question from Marianne Perron.
Oh,
She's
Marianne.
asking, can you tell us a memorable story about an interaction you've had with an invasive species?
Okay. Well, if I'm going to tell a story, it'll be this one. So like I kind of said earlier, I lived on the water. Well, I didn't really mention this, but we have a cottage along the St. Lawrence River that we'd live at every summer, probably for the last like 15 years or so. And I guess from my childhood, I always liked the river, so we'd go swimming quite often, and I had my little snorkel, and I'd do my little fishing, and still to this day, I love snorkeling. And I'm always coming across gobies nowadays, so I will often just kind of stare at them as much as I'm like, what are you doing here? They're actually quite interesting to look at and just see their darting behavior, and they're actually quite interesting if you get over the fact that all this background information. So that's just a personal story. They're cool to watch, honestly. Yeah.
And they
Thank you,
stare through your
Marianne.
soul whenever you're snorkeling. Thank you. The next question is from another river institutor,
Oh, wow.
Christina Charette. She's asking, which invasive species should we have on our watch list? Da, da, da.
Ooh. Honestly, the few that I had in the slideshow as examples, that water soldier example, like I said, it's not super widespread at the moment, but it has potential to become widespread. So those kind of monitoring tactics, like I'd mentioned, making sure that your boats are cleared after you're taking them from one water body to another, make sure there's nothing on there. That could be one. And the tench. I know they're not as widespread, but they do have high reproductive rate, which means things could change into the future. So definitely on the watch list. Thank you, Christina.
So knowing you and knowing what your thoughts are on what we can all do on a daily basis as individuals, as human beings, what should we do to prevent accidentally transferring or moving things when we're out and about? So again, education is so important. So are there things that we should do as individuals to moving this plant or moving this something on our boots? Or I guess that would be the suggestion.
Absolutely. I guess the main thing is, like, one of the best things you can kind of do is just leave nature alone. So yeah, like for instance, the example of moving things around. Don't be taking things, unrooting things, putting them somewhere else unless you use, let's say, like an identifying app, like the iNaturalist or Seek. You're able to actually take pictures in the moment, and it'll identify it for you, and you can be like, oh my gosh, this is invasive. I shouldn't touch this. Just in case you accidentally get some on your boots, or yeah, you're accidentally bringing it to a new area where it could potentially create harm. Yeah, just caring for the environment. That's a really, really good question. I guess just staying informed, kind of like I said too, doing your own research. If you are really inspired by these kinds of topics, just kind of looking online and using apps in your everyday life, and yeah, talking to people, also like spreading the word. If this kind of stuff is like eye-opening to you, then next time you see a friend, be like, have you heard about the goby, like, or the zebra mussels, and it might get people thinking and increase the amount of communication and knowledge being spread. That's really what all this kind of comes down to, is just sharing information and trying to get people more involved, because there's not enough. Thank you.
Dania Lair is asking, what would you say is the worst invasive species with the most devastating ecological effects to date in the St. Lawrence?
Okay, I want to say the dry sand mussels, but I am thinking more about the Great Lakes. But they are very much connected, and there are a lot of dry sand mussels are like zebra mussels and quagga mussels. Kind of like I described, the whole water filtering, feeding mechanisms. They're able to take a lot. Actually, I think one mussel a day can filter 1 liter. So times that by billions of mussels, that's billions of liters of water, and we're losing all the little particles that are kind of the basis of the food web in the freshwater ecosystem that is the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River. So I'm pretty sure that's number one. And yeah, it's very, very concerning. So definitely, if you want to read more about that. There's also a really amazing documentary called All Too Clear that we had playing at our previous symposium. I forget if it was recorded, but you could definitely find it with a Google search, and it'll tell you a lot more about like what's happening with the zebra mussels if you're interested. So yeah, that's the one I think on the top of the list for sure. Thank you.
I'm just wondering if there's a difference between where the current is very rough and the edge. Like the edge, it seems natural that things would grow there because they don't get to move too much. Mm-hmm. Is there very much? Because I remember going near the canal.
Yeah.
And when I was 60 years ago, if I was thirsty, I would drink from the river.
Right.
But I would never dare do that now.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between 50 years ago. So is there something that's very, very different between does the current affect the species that come over?
I guess, yeah, like in the areas that are more near shore, you're not going to have that current as much as you would in like the deeper waters. So I would assume these areas would have more invasives that are maybe able to kind of plant themselves. And the kind of the top ones that I talked about, like the round goby, for instance, dry sand mussels, like we'll see them on in the nearshore environments. But I am wondering, like, I'm trying to think back to exactly what, like passive drift. This is something that happens where, like round gobies, for instance, smaller round gobies are able to kind of go with the current, and that's how they're able to move in different ways, or like let's say like downstream. So that's a mechanism that's helped by the current, if I'm not mistaken. So I guess it kind of depends at which way you look at it, but I would assume, I mean, plant species specifically, we definitely see more of them in like the less high current areas. Then again, if it's deeper water, we can't really see the bottom. So yeah, kind of a hard one to answer, but that's a really interesting question. I'll look into it as well. Thank you.
We have another one online. So, would the gobies have lots of heavy metals due to eating zebra mussels?
Heavy metals, potentially. because if the heavy metals are, if they're in the system and there's some of the contaminants that are potentially there, then gobies would potentially bioaccumulate, but it would really depend on the area, like if how polluted an area is. Again, something that I don't think I've come across like those tests necessarily, if there has been any. So something to look into for sure, especially if we're going to start eating them as a snack. So definitely a good question, because if they are in the system, then the mussels are definitely going to be filter feeding and taking them up, and then the gobies that eat them would have them. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. I have a question.
Yes, Emily.
It might be a strange question for some people, but
Okay.
you got to have your favorite in every category of things that you work in. So what is your favorite invasive species?
My favorite? Oh gosh. I feel like, I talk about them so much, and because I see them, I feel like the round goby, I'm just too close to it to not say that they're not, because I just know so much about them and I see them a lot. I'm trying to think of one that might interest me though, because it's a list of 131, which is quite a few. I don't know. Eurasian milfoil is kind of interesting. That's another plant species, kind of like I've talked about. They create really dense mats, and they're just able to like succeed, which is like, as much as it's not good, it's also just like, again, they're plopped here and they're just doing their thing and spreading, unfortunately. But yeah, I think they all have their own story, right? So they're all a little interesting, but I guess, round goby.
When I was, after 30 years of fishing, 30 years ago, they were talking about mercury being a problem in the fish we consume. Is that still very much of a problem, or is it a different kind of contaminant in the fish now?
Aaron knows. Let's go, Aaron.
Bring it over to the room.
Perfect. I'm like, I can't.
The answer is yes. The priority contaminant of concern in the area, Cornwall and Akwesasne, are in an area of concern due to industrial legacy pollutants, and the biggest one in our area is still mercury. And so if you use the Guide to Eating Ontario Fish, they have advisories on how many fish they recommend eating per month. And most of the advisories here are driven by mercury and now PFAS as well.
Hi. I was just wondering, is there a particular reason why the kind of pathway from zebra mussels up to the top level predators is facilitated by round goby?
I guess because the goby eats a lot of the mussels. Honestly, I'm trying to think back if there must be other species that would prey on the dry snids, but I think mostly it's gobies, and that's the reason that connection is happening. It's like a new pathway in the system.
I'm a scuba diver,
Yeah.
so I go deep,
Yes.
and we do notice that the drums like the zebra mussels.
Oh, they do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And you can hear them crunch, crunch,
Wow.
crunch away. Yes.
I want to go. Can I go with you one day and
Oh,
see this?
You get certified and.
I have my license.
Oh,
Yes. Just not
anytime.
not deep water, but yeah. Thank you. Well, Thank you.
Aaron Dane.
Hi, great
Hi.
talk, thanks.
Thank you.
I have a question about, so these days in an increasingly globalized world, I think there's some level of inevitability with species being introduced between habitats where they weren't native before.
Of course.
And with that in mind, is there a line at some point in the future where, say, a non-native species becomes considered a native species? And is there a line where managing these species becomes less about preserving the ecosystem the way they are now versus managing what might be a new normal with these species?
I think, that's a really good point, Aaron. I think for these examples, for species that are kind of past the point of being able to be eradicated, for sure, we kind of have to look at it as it's a new norm, and it is definitely part of the food system. So kind of moving forward, with those new interactions that are occurring, how can we make it work and keep a balance that is sustainable and makes sense. Yeah, and if, you know, populations continue to increase in a way that's unsustainable, looking at what we can do to obviously quit that, you know, yeah. So really good point, because yeah, of course there's plenty of ways, like the ballast water regulations, for instance, that we're able to minimize introductions, but that doesn't stop biofouling, for instance, which is where like mussels, for instance, could actually place themselves and stick to ships, and then that's a mechanism for them to get in. So of course there's always room. Yeah, there's never 100% accuracy in management tactics, so definitely something to think about as we continue to move things from one end of the globe to another. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you. And there's more questions online.
Wow.
This one coming from Matt Windle.
Hi, Matt.
He is asking, what can you share about the new goby on the block?
Oh,
The tube-nosed
the
goby.
tube-nosed goby.
That's right, folks. New goby on the block.
Oh my gosh, Matt. I'm so happy you mentioned. Yeah, tube nose is, it's kind of like the cousin to round goby. And I don't want to say like very, very similar, but it does have kind of a similar story in the sense of being introduced by shipping ballast water, and they've increased over time, and they've integrated to the system in kind of similar ways. Of course, there's differences, and like they're a little bit smaller, and yeah, there's obviously different interactions that will most likely happen. But there is a lot of current research happening because it's the rate at which tube-nosed gobies specifically have expanded in the St. Lawrence River is a lot faster than the round gobies. So there's a lot of questions around like why that is. One thing maybe being that passive drift thing that I'd mentioned earlier with the currents, and also domestic ships potentially being a reason for bringing them from one end to another. So definitely that's on the watch list. I don't know how I forgot about tube-nosed goby, guys. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Matt. That's definitely another one. We actually had a paper in the works, so stay tuned.
Just a comment that I found interesting, that maybe people here might be interested in. That Australia, I don't know if anyone here has ever been to Australia, but they're obsessed with invasive species. And you have to watch a mandatory video about invasive species before you depart the plane. And then there's dogs at the airport that are ready to smell invasive species, and it's mandatory to wash your boots before you enter any hiking trail there.
Right.
And they monitor that all very closely. So anyway, there's more we could do for sure here.
100%. Yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, I think like Australia, I've heard a lot of, like they have a lot of non-native species and that have become invasive, and it shouldn't take it becoming really, really bad to have those kinds of precautions in place. So it's definitely a good point. Like just taking care and being diligent. Yeah, and just takes a little extra time, but it's definitely worth it in the long run.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question, and this question is, how do gobies do in brackish water?
So, yeah, I'm trying to remember back to the goby report because it's been a little while. I actually believe that they evolved in a little bit more of a higher salinity, so not necessarily like fresh water. So they're actually, if I'm remembering correctly, able to survive in brackish water actually. So yeah, so they would go further than the freshwater limit, I would believe, kind of further towards the Atlantic in our system. So yeah, very interesting point. They kind of do it all, like really. Yeah, so good question.
Excellent, thank you. And I actually have another question. So I recently found some mats of starry stonewort, the macroalgae, in a canal near where I live, and it's all over the place. And I'm wondering, I know it's in the upper St. Lawrence, but to what extent is its range that we know of?
I'd have to look into that, Emily, honestly, because the funny thing with this report, or not funny, but it's a little different from some of the other reports because a lot of the indicators look at specific populations for one species, but the invasive species report is like a list and then kind of not really diving deep into a lot of them, but a lot of them have such, I'm sure, very interesting stories and we could definitely figure it out if we looked at some data points to see. We could map it out together even, maybe, you and I.
Awesome. We'll have a coffee date.
Okay, perfect.
Incredible.
If you find what you think might be an invasive species, is there something that you can do or somewhere where you can report it?
Definitely. I think the River Institute is a great place to report potential invasive species detections. Also, like, great to take a picture, make sure that you know exactly where it was found so we could potentially go back and see what the situation is, if it's a one-time thing or if it's then potentially growing into something bigger. Definitely a good idea. River Institute's always available. I wonder if the email, well, we have our emails up here, but River Institute email, what is the River Institute email? The general one.
Info
At
at riverinstitute.ca.
There we go. So yeah, definitely, if you find something that you're concerned about, let us know. Take pictures. Yeah.
There's also EdMaps, which is a wonderful
Yes.
community science app that I tried to use for Starry Stonework, actually. So
Okay.
also
yeah.
usable.
Yes. There's also IMAPS Invasive, which I'm trying to remember if that's just US, but yeah, there's a few. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, and I'm just checking online. Oh, we have another one. Oh, Denise is asking, where can we find this report you keep referencing?
Oh, okay. So if you go to riverreport.ca, you'll be able to find all the information about the Great River Report, and it'll go to the science page. At the moment, I'm actually just finishing up the invasive species indicator, so give me a few weeks. It'll be done pretty soon. But right now, if you are interested, we do have the yellow perch technical report all done. And if you don't want to read the entire report, there are infographics and kind of highlights for each of the main points for that technical report. Actually, here today I have these infographics for the Round Goby technical report, which is also very soon coming to our website. And yeah, some of them I included in the presentation today, but there's a lot more that you guys can learn about. So yeah, maybe, I don't know what to do with this, but this is just something to hold in my hand. So yeah, there's a lot in progress right now, but definitely go to the riverreport.ca to learn more about the project. And there's also some community stories on there that are really interesting about people in our community and what they do as stewards to the environment, or just things that they do along the river. That's super interesting. Yes, thank you.
Great, and we have another question in the front here.
Just another comment about ISAP Canada. I don't know if you listed that one. It's Invasive Species Awareness Program Canada. I recently thought I saw an invasive species and I emailed them.
Okay.
And they were real people. They right away followed up. They were very concerned, but I was incorrect in what I saw.
Oh, okay. But still amazing that you did that. Well done. It's better, better safe than sorry. It's awesome.
All right, well, as you know, you can contact Mackenzie or Marianne via email if you do have more questions, and please do check out our social media channels for when these reports are available. Any final words, Mackenzie?
Thank you so much. I appreciate everyone's attention and patience. And for everyone online, thank you. There's a lot of questions, so very happy with that. Lots of engagement. Yeah, thank you.